What are your current biggest challenges that you're facing? Volunteers, attracting, retaining, managing them. What are the challenges that you are facing as centers at the moment? So we've got attracting, yeah? Demand versus supply, yeah? So we're looking at the challenge of our management committee. Sorry, I'm just doing like this. So we're looking at our succession planning, aren't we? So basically around that financial stability. What are the obstacles which are not allowing you to meet those challenges, or to operate effectively? So, obviously, shortage of skills. What else? What are the other obstacles that are stopping you? Training? Yeah, so training. Yeah, so we've got always the regional and rural issues. So continuity. I want you to start looking at your internal obstacles. I want to look, because this is what governance is. Governance is about putting your processes in place. So what internal obstacles, other than what I've badly written up there? So communication. Okay, so basically with the playback theater, one of the things was precisely that, wasn't it? It was actually looking at all those different factors, which is what is stopping you from achieving your goal. So the first thing is always, this is governance. As I'm throwing things out at you, this is governance. Do you all have your goals set? Do the people that are sitting on your management committees, do they understand what the vision or the mission of the organization, of the center is? Do the volunteers that come into the center, do they know what the vision and mission and goal of the center is? So if you're nodding yes, great, that's governance. You've got it in place, and we'll talk about how you're doing it. And that's what this is all about. And one of the things we understand is the challenge that government bodies also have in trying to understand each individual's mission goal. But at the same time, one has to also acknowledge that each center goal is also based where it is set geographically, what their demographics are, and therefore that's where the visions and the mission will not all be able to be aligned. It's a bit like we have in the state a new procurement reform, and they're trying to put everything in line. It's going to be very difficult. We were one of those organizations that when we were going through our service agreement, which yesterday I found out we nearly got, so we're nearly there, so we'll have 5 years of tranquility. They didn't know where to put us in. Again, let's look back at the playback theater. They didn't know which box to put us in. They couldn't understand which box. And so this is the challenge that government has. So we're going to look today at the governance side of things. So we're going to look at it from an internal process. And I'm giving you today a tool to look at that internal process that should be able to support you, or at least start to make you think of how you're going to get rid of those obstacles and how to move forward in achieving your goals. But today is about how can you utilize this resource that was developed. So some context behind it was that Connect Groups realized that in order for our self-help and support groups, which I'm sure you understand are groups of people that come together for a common condition, and it's from victims of crime, road trauma, grandparents rearing grandchildren. We've got 615 sitting under us, and we haven't even touched regional and rural, because we just don't have the funding to get out there. How can we ensure that they're working in an effective way so that they then can source funding? Because that's the biggest risk you've got. If you haven't got a good financial management system and you go and apply for a grant, that is one of the first things they ask you, because that is money that goes to you. And therefore, if you don't have an effective governance financial management system, you will be seen as a high risk to that funding body, even a charity. So that's when we thought we need to put something together. But how can we do it? People can't go to the full-on training course. Because like you said before, a lot of you are working on your own, or you're basically a volunteer. So there's a variety of things. PANGO, the Pilbara Association of Non-Government Organizations, also had the similar need, and they were dealing predominantly with Indigenous boards of management in the Pilbara. So we both approached Lottery West, and this comes out of a Lottery West grant. It took us over 18 months to get it over the line, and it took us another 18 months to actually get it ready. So that's why we put this together. The way that it is put, the way that it's going to be utilized, we'll be discussing today. So governance. Our definition, one of the many definitions of governance, is the act, process, or power of governing. Conceptually, governance, as opposed to good governance, can be defined as the rule of rulers, typically within a given set of rules. So governance, it's around setting those parameters. Now, we wouldn't want to think that the chair of a management committee is a ruler as such, but would you agree that that's what governance is? Did you come here feeling, I know what the definition of governance is? Do you now, looking at this definition, say, I do have an act and a process or the power of governing my center? Yes? Well, you must if you've been doing it for a long time. So I'm being hopeful that you are actually doing it. Today is about identifying those little tiny little areas that you might need to do a little bit more work on. So the governance process is by which authority is confirmed on rulers. And we don't like the word rulers, but that's what's coming out of the dictionary. By which they make the rules, and by which those rules are enforced and modified. So, understanding governance requires an identification of both the rulers and the rules. Does that make sense? So, who makes the rules and who follows the rules? So, a management committee, you would envisage, are the rulers who make the rules, right? And then they impose, then those rules need to be moved forward, as well as the various processes by which they are selected, defined, and linked together and with the society generally. So I would envisage that all of you, when you're looking at your vision and your mission statement, are looking towards who you will be taking care of or who you're going to be providing that service to. Would you say that's the case? Would any of you be able to sum up their vision statement and mission statement like this? Do you have it up in your centers? Do you ever refer back to it at your management committee meetings? Yeah? Okay. It's a good thing to have, to remind everyone why you're there and to remind those who are using your centers why you're actually there. What is good governance? So there's a difference between governance, just as such, and what is considered to be good governance. And if we look at our funding bodies and our government, they're always looking for good governance examples, right? You are looking for good governance, would you say? Yeah? And I think it's a really good thing. We make their lives a lot easier, and we make our lives a lot easier if we actually look at applying good governance. So typically, it's defined the terms of the mechanisms thought to be needed to promote it. For example, depending on the role of the organization, good governance has been associated with democracy. So do we have a democratic way of doing things? Or do we have a chair of our management committee or the treasurer who decides how the money is going to be spent and doesn't listen to the coordinator volunteer? So it's a question around democracy. So if there is a democratic way that the organization, the center is functioning, then we consider that to be good governance. Civil rights is also a way of defining good governance. Good governance is also about transparency, and it's about the work that you're doing and being transparent about the way that you're working. It's that level of transparency. So what happens at the board does actually transpire through and within the rule of law. And what we also say is with efficient public services, which is what you do. So if we say, when is actually governance needed, we tend to say that the need for governance actually exists anytime a group of people come together. So again, if you think about what I just said, it's about that democratic process. And if you think what I just said, it's also about those rules and rulers. So it's about that. And because at the end of the day, you're all trying to accomplish the one end. And what's the biggest challenge you have when you've got a board? What are the dynamics when a board doesn't work well? One of the things that we always say is when, one of the biggest challenges or obstacles to good governance is when there's an ego on the board, or there is, they basically have their own end that they wish to accomplish. That's right, that was the word, I couldn't get it. So it's those hidden agendas. So good governance, instead, is when it's looking at the other way. Now, governance does actually determine who actually has the power, who makes the decisions, and how other players make their voice heard and how account is rendered. So there is always someone that has to take that load. There's always someone that is accountable for what they do. And that's when we call it the ruler, because they then have to ensure, I would say the rules are our policies and procedures, to ensure that that is actually happening. Okay, ultimately the application of good governance serves to realize organization and societal goals. So that's why we've got to be uplifted by governance, because we've got a great toolkit there. It's a little map that tells us how we can achieve those goals. And therefore, when we find those obstacles, let's look to governance to help us overcome them. I know it sounds like a magic trick, but it actually does work. So I've said how it came about, okay? And it says that as part of it, you've got a manual, which you have. So we're going to have a closer look at this actual manual. So what you've got at the moment is you've got a training manual, and it covers 10 topics. And I'm going to go through those 10 topics very quickly because we started a bit late. It actually has a DVD, which I don't think I can play. And then it also has an actual CD, which has all templates that you can utilize. Strategic plan templates, JDF templates, risk management templates, all those things that you go, how am I going to find it? And what's really good about these templates is you can write over them. They're electronic, so it's not as if you then have to redo them. So we thought this is a great way to help people. They want to do something, and we know how time-consuming it is if you don't have the experience. First time that you employ someone, where are you going to find a job description? What do you know what to put within that job description? Or you decide that I'm going to write, someone becomes incorporated, great. We need to write our constitution. Before that, what does a constitution look like? So it's those steps by step. So we added this on after, because initially it was just photocopies of it and you would have had to write it. Instead, that's what should be in there. And that's why I said, if anyone is missing this disc, let me know, because that's where all these templates are contained. So that's how it's set up. So these are the 10 topics that this actual manual looks at. It looks at democracy. It looks at incorporated bodies. What does that mean? It talks about management teams. It looks at meetings, how to conduct those meetings, decision making, which is a huge problem if we were looking at, if you do have someone with their own agenda. And also it looks like, how do you actually, what is governance around how do you record those meetings, even the informal meetings and so forth. Documentation. What is the documentation that you should have to meet compliance? And I'm just reminding you that we now have this ACNC looming over us, taking over from the tax office. So start thinking about it. Accountability is huge. You are accountable for what you're doing. You are accountable for the money that you are receiving or the money that you are generating. And what is important is you look at the accountability of your board members. Someone said, oh yeah, we just picked them without the skill sets. Is that right?
Well, sometimes you have to take what you can get.
Exactly. So one of the things around accountability is, do those board members know, or does that management committee know that they're actually accountable if the organization folds? Have they been informed in regards to that role? Has the organization, the center that's invited someone on their board, ensured that there are the right insurances in place to protect the board of management? Have you told them that there are? So these are the things that you need to think about. And I know that we just try and bring people in because we've got to meet our constitution and we need 10 people on the seat. But sometimes it's not a bad idea, if you're struggling, to review your constitution and to say, look, 5 people is more reasonable than 11. Or to review the constitution and change and say up to. Because if you've got a quorum of 4 and you write up to 11, it might be that it's a year that 7 is fine. You've got all the skill sets you want on the board. So just think of those things that you can actually put in place so that you're not meeting governance or you're not meeting the Incorporation Act. So it's always not about the bums on seats, so that you've got time to find the right people. But that's the accountability. Staff and volunteers, there's a section around staff and volunteers. Very much like, you know, what do we do with the volunteers? How do we train the volunteers? How do we attract the volunteers? How do we make them feel part of the organization? And if we looked at that, it wasn't any of you who said they've got all those volunteers and they don't know what to do with them. Yeah. Have you ever had that situation, a lot of volunteers and not knowing what to do with them? Okay, you got to keep volunteers busy. If they come and they've got nothing to do, you know, they'll go. They don't want to come and just stand around like they did. You know, you go over there and then you go over there. Oh, do the stationery cupboard. You know, and it was just done by another volunteer. So it has a thing like that. And then it talks about customer and clients, and it'll look into, you know, do you have a policy around, what you call it, when a client is not satisfied? Can't think. It's got things like that. What is it? Yes, complaint, thank you. I'm Italian, sometimes my English goes. And then common management issues. So we're just going to go and look a little bit through it and dissect it, all right? So what we consider this is a 15-minute session. So when we produce this, we have a DVD, which I can't show you, I'm so sorry, but it's in there. But the whole point was, when do people have time? When do Board of Management have time? So each section, there is actually a 15-minute DVD that, one, you can put at the beginning of your board management meeting. Let's reflect on democracy. And it can be a really good start to a conversation. Or when you have a new board member or management committee member coming into the organization, you can give them that DVD. And you say, this is what we mean by governance. Could you please listen to these components? So that's how it was developed. So it's self-paced, by yourself or as a team, and it has options for, as I said, that internal or that external discussion. So if you want to say, we need to review our documentation, you can put the DVD on, you can go with your file, you can have your laptop that works with the DVD and with the templates, and you can say, this is what we're looking to do. And it's a great way. Do you have an annual strategic planning review? Any of you? Yeah? Do you do an annual evaluation? Right, this is really good to use at that moment. How did we go? Which documentation do we have in place? What is missing? Let's look at our policies. What is missing in order for us to achieve that governance? So that's why it works really well in those scenarios. All right, so I'm not going to go into this because I know we're running a bit late. But anyway, democracy is a really, really, really important part of governance. And therefore, you'll have that. One of the points of the principles of democracy, it says compassion, valuing diversity, which I think is what you all do. You value diversity within your centers. I find that you're an extremely welcoming and, just kind of community service within your service provision. A lot of us have sitting within our service agreements that we need to show equitable and everything, but you really actually do it on a daily basis. It's about contribution. It's about freedom of speech. Can I just ask, what is your definition of compassion? There's a really clear distinction. It says empathy is showing empathy, and we tend to show empathy, especially if you look in the centers, someone comes in, yes, I understand, and then you'll refer them on to maybe a course that they can do, and then it stops there. The definition of compassion is that you continue that journey with them. Because it's easy to show empathy, but it's a lot harder to show compassion. Does that resonate with anyone? There's a wonderful gentleman from Relationship Australia, Michael, and he does a whole presentation around compassion and empathy. And the sector and yourselves, as part of governance, are really called upon that principle, because that's what you're doing. You're actually showing empathy and compassion as a center. So it's important that the management committees remember that, because sometimes they get distracted and it goes on to different areas. So that needs to be at the forefront to remember as a management committee. And that's why I say it's always important to have your mission, your vision, your guiding principles at hand so that you remember why you're actually there. So this section goes on about democracy. Then we look at incorporated bodies. You all know about the Incorporation Act. You're all incorporated. So basically, your governance is to ensure that you meet that compliance. And that's why I'm saying, if you're having problems recruiting people with skills onto your board, you might go through the right process and to call a special meeting and to make the variation of your constitution so that it meets.
Actually have a meeting.
It's a really good idea. We celebrate 30 years this year of the organization. So you got to think, if we think of again about the keynote speaker, where were we 30 years ago and where we are today? I've been with the organization for nearly 5 years. And in these 5 years alone, there's been a huge change. There's a huge change to the point that we are really having to review within our constitution the classification of our members. So what was set 30 years ago is not relevant entirely today. And we're really, the whole thing of expecting management committees to meet every month is very utopistic, that they will all show up. The fact that a board member will be released from their board position if they miss 2 meetings is a disaster that needs to be overlooked. So again, we can't fake and say that they were there when they were not there, but we found ways. Because our constitution says people have to be there. It doesn't say in person. So we basically Skype our board members in when due to circumstances they're not able to be in attendance. But those are the kind of things, we need to look at the way media is changing and change our constitution to reflect that. So one of the questions I'll challenge you with is, do you think that whether or not, this is something else, whether or not you're incorporated, you should still look to governance? Or is it just because you're incorporated? Shall I rephrase that? You're looking at me. So basically, if you're incorporated, you're legally bound to a series of compliance that you have to do. Do you think that even if you're not incorporated, you should be looking at governance? Yes, yes, yes. Resounding yes? Yes, yay! Let them show next door that we're having a whale of a time. They'll be going, oh, I should have gone to that session. Okay. Oh, governance is so fun. Okay, so, I had a hard 2 acts to follow. Okay, so then it's got also all the points that you're talking around now about roles and responsibilities, code of conduct. Again, does everyone have a code of conduct for their board? Yes? Yes? All of you? Yes. Awesome. That's brilliant. Do you also have a code of conduct for those that go into your centers? Does the center have a general code of conduct? All right. And what we say is we do have occasions that we have, as I said, very begruntled, and therefore you need to be able to point to them that the code of conduct is respect and da-da-da-da-da. Then we've got another section which looks at the meetings. And it looks at the structure, the agenda, the documents, the policies and procedures, and any policy development. Do you have a policy in place of how to actually prepare for your meetings? So how do you prepare? Who prepares the documents for the board meeting, for the meetings? The secretary does. Yeah? Okay, so this is when we look at policy and procedure. We're looking at those internal policies and procedures that will support you in succession planning, that will support you in maintaining, especially those volunteer board members. There's nothing worse than someone not knowing what they're supposed to do by when. And then I find board meetings really I mean, as the executive officer, I had mine yesterday, and I've got a great board. I find them really, oh my God, here we go. You know, there's always a paper missing, or where's this and where's that. So it's about having really good procedures in place that will support an effective meeting to take place. So obviously someone sets the agenda. Who sets the agenda? Is everyone like that, or is someone taking over? Secretary? Yeah, yeah, okay, so you've got good things, right. And then you know what documents need to be brought at every board meeting. Yeah, what is the key documents that you need to have at the board meetings? I'm going to be really banal. Financials, correspondence, minutes, and then you can decide that. Your agenda can vary. Our board structure has changed. So our board no longer has, it has the deputy, and it's got the chair, the deputy, the treasurer, and the secretary, but we've got portfolios. Each board member has a portfolio, and they are responsible for that portfolio. So we've got marketing and strategy, marketing and promotions. Then we have service delivery. Then we have media contacts, for example. So each one of them has a portfolio, HR, finance, obviously, and therefore, is a board strategic or operational? Because one of the biggest things when I've been delivering this training is that they have a lot of board members that will not release, and they want to be strategic. They think they're being strategic, but they're being incredibly operational. So my board, within their portfolios, are actually feeding into me information. So for example, they'll get in touch with me, for example, the funding, and say, I just saw this grant, but it's not that she's going to write the grant. She says, I want you to look at this grant, analyze it, write a brief, and bring it to the board of why we should or shouldn't apply for this grant. And there's so many of our groups that have found funding, but they're really struggling. So what they're doing is they're micromanaging. Finally, they've got paid staff, and they're micromanaging them. And therefore, guess what's happening? They've all resigned, the staff, not the board. And then they go, oh, but what did we do? So this is it. And so this will sit within that thing. Succession planning is fundamental. It is fundamental that you identify someone in your existing board that could potentially take over after you go. And therefore having the right policies and procedures so that if you decide to leave as the chair or as the president or even as the executive officer, someone can easily come in and pick it up rather than having to start again. So those are why the policies and procedures are really, really important. And there's a section on that. The next section is about decision making. Is anyone having any problems around that within Everyone's fine? Everyone's good? You know the process? It's respected, the chair is respected, the chair doesn't make the decision for everyone. People don't feel intimidated. Do people declare, do you have within your agenda one of the first items to declare conflict of interest? Is it sitting as part of your agenda? It should. You should always have, you know, based on the agenda, does anyone have a conflict of interest? You know, it's really important to set it right at the beginning of your agenda, just to make sure, and therefore the person can either be invited to stay or asked to leave the room. Especially if you've got we've got a board member who's an ICT vendor, and therefore we cannot have him sitting in the room and then, you know, talking well about a system that he's the sole in the state, because obviously he's going to be telling us what a wonderful system that is. It's fine as long as he gives it to us for pro bono. Otherwise, no, out of the room he goes. All right, any contentious issues? This is the part around that decision making, because that's the most difficult part, is when you have to put everyone's heads together and come to a consensuous decision, and to ensure that you don't end up with a split board. And what happens when there's these circumstances that occur is that the organization is not able to move forward.
Yeah, it's affected.
You know, if you've got, and that's why it's so important to maintain that stability and to work, and if everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are, you know, it's not going to save the day, because, you know, people's dynamics are the ones, it's those personal dynamics that can hinder the organization by going forward. And that's why it is so important that you just don't invite people on your board just because. When I entered the sector, I wasn't in the sector before, and I entered the sector, and I went to a board meeting, and they said, right, we got a vacancy, who wants to be on our board? You've got to screen your board members. You need to make sure that what they're going to bring. And one of the questions is, what can you bring to the board? And what can I bring? What is motivating you to come? And what are you going to bring? One of the best places to, if you're Metro, obviously, but I don't know where it works, if they're available elsewhere, is the Australian Institute of Directors. They run, around about October, they run a speed dating. And what happens is you have the new graduates coming out with their diploma of board directors, and they're looking for not-for-profits to sit on their boards. So it's not a free event, it's about $95, and it's done really well. I mean, I'm not single, and I could sort of relate to my girlfriend who is, because that's how I felt. A bit like being told that I was going to be turned on today. So that was sort of, it was the same kind of ambiguous situation, but it was brilliant, and we've managed to bring on board two. And to have that caliber of people on your board when you're so small is phenomenal, because they'll come with that desire to bring about. And therefore, when you go to these things, you actually say what kind of person you're looking for and what skill sets you're hoping that they're going to be able to bring. So think about that as different avenues of trying to bring people in onto your boards. Then obviously we've got a section which is staff and volunteers, and it really goes into depth about who is the employer. What the manual will give you, just some hints around the best way to engage with your volunteers and how to retain them. And one of the things is to actually have something, like we said before, something for them to do. Volunteering WA, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, have some amazing resources available that I would encourage you to look at. Because our section is nothing compared to what you can actually get from Volunteering WA. But, and it's all around, you know, getting that volunteer, maintaining them, and keeping their interest up. And when we look at the governance, if they're aware what the ethos and the mission of the organization, and if they are made available, and if you can easily make available to them policies and procedures to conduct a series of activities, it's a lot better. And therefore, from a risk management side of things, they know what they need to do. So, you know, you're addressing occupational health and safety and all of those things. And obviously you would know that in order to engage with volunteers, you need to have the insurance, and also that volunteers do not do the work of what should have been a paid person. And we know that. And it's a really fine line. It's so difficult. I mean, even with us, we say, okay, well, that wasn't in our service agreement, so they can do it, and it's only temporary. But we've got an actual induction folder, which actually goes step by step in any of the tasks that they do. They actually have a procedure of how to do those tasks, and it's easier for you without having to be over them, especially we use them for admin purposes. So just things to think about, and for them to be aware, again, around that code of conduct. Now, appraisals. Have you ever done appraisals to volunteers? Yeah. Yeah, one of the things around succession planning is if you really have, like you just said, a volunteer that's been there for a long time, you know, you might want to give them an appraisal, but the appraisal is going to be around really boosting them to keep them, and perhaps to start to engage with them around coming into the center in a bigger capacity, maybe even on your board of management. So the appraisals are not only for the employees, but the appraisal should also be for your volunteers. It's a great way to, one, if you've got, who hasn't had a volunteer that doesn't want to leave and it's detrimental to the actual center? There has been organizations that have had volunteers that are detrimental to the actual running of that service, and you don't know how to get rid of them. And therefore, having within your policy and procedures that there is going to be an appraisal, very much so as with a normal employee. Obviously, those who have employees, you've got a 3-month probation period and you run an appraisal, and then you have your annual appraisal. So you should be looking at putting things like that in place as well. I know that it's like an add-on, but that's good governance. So, and that is one way to look at your succession planning, but it's also a way of resolving those issues when you do have unwanted people within the organization. We had a clear example of one. It took us supporting this organization for over a year until they managed to remove this person from the organization because it was just detrimental to them. So just food for thought that you will find in the manual. Governance documentation. All right, here's everything. Who's got all this stuff? Who's got a strategic plan? How often do you do your strategic plan? Annually? Annually?
5 years.
5 years? How often do you review it?
Yearly.
Okay, all right, so you got a 5-year plan, you renew it annually to make sure that it's still relevant to when you set it 5 years ago. We usually say a 5-year strategic plan is a bit too long of a plan. 3 years is max. Who's got, so obviously all of you have a vision, mission, constitution, an organizational structure, and a business plan? Yeah? Annual plan. Who gives out their annual plan? Yeah? Everyone does that at the AGM? You actually present an annual plan? Marketing plan. Those are the things that you can have, but you don't need to have because you don't have the capacity of actually doing it. Because a marketing plan will incorporate everything you need to know about how to market your organization. And with it goes the money that's going to be allocated to each of those activities. That's a really effective marketing plan. A bad marketing plan is, we're going to get the radio, we're going to go out in the newspapers, we're going to be doing this and that, and then you've got no money, no resources, no volunteers, so it's just going to crash. So when you do your marketing plan, if ever you do it, make sure you've got a budget for it, then you do your marketing plan. We got $10,000, what can we do with $10,000? Not coming up with a marketing plan that you need $150,000. If you go to Lottery West, that's the best way to do it. You go to Lottery West, first you apply and you get a consultant that will develop the marketing plan and will identify how much money you need, or the other way around. Okay? Succession plan, that's more about putting processes in place to address it. Obviously, you've got internal policies and procedures. How often do you review your policies and procedures? I mean, we're not saying that policies and procedures should, what you should be doing is, one of the really good things to do at a management level is have a list of your policies and procedures, right, at the beginning of the year. Then at the end of the year, you just make sure that there's no extra, or along the way, how many new policies and procedures did we have to look at? Then you, based on new reforms that come into the organization, do we need to review any of those policies and procedures? It can be done annually, but it should be done every 2 years. You should just make sure that you're ticking the box. If you're funded by government, one of the main things that we have from the Department for Communities is we've got to demonstrate all the policies and procedures, and we need to demonstrate when they were reviewed. So just food for thought around that. You know, LinkQuest has got some great policies and procedures. We actually go and knock on their door when we think that we're missing one. So, and I think they've got them actually listed on their website. So I would encourage you, I mean, as part of their members, to go and look at that. Induction manual. Do you have an induction manual for your board? You know, it's a way of welcoming people. You present yourself really well. If you've got a new board member, they've got their induction manual. In my case, I welcome the new board member. We go through the induction manual together. I bring them up to speed where we're at, our key priorities. They go to the first board meeting. Obviously, they're being screened by our executive committee. Sometimes I've made the recommendation. And they feel already part of it, and they feel it's, you know, they're so proud. They go with this manual. Unfortunately, we've just started to do that. So board members that have been with us for a long time are jealous because they don't have it at the moment. And obviously your customer service charter. I know Playgroup WA has a great customer service charter. I do believe it's you guys. This is other documentation. Risk management plan. Do you have one? Job description, provision plan. This is just, it just goes on and on and on. I think it's up to you to decide. I think a risk management plan is something that you should look at. You really should. You should look what are the highest risks for this organization and rate them. The Department for Finance, if I can give you some heads up, they've got a great resource. It's a bit old, but it comes with a CD as well. So if you go onto their website, I can't remember the name, I would recommend you to look at it. And also the Community Services website, there's a step-by-step of why you should be looking at risk management. So you've got to look at it. So what we do again is we've got a list. Each of the board brings to the table what they believe the perceived risks are within their portfolio. And then we ensure that we have those policies and procedures in place around how do we minimize that potential risk. So for example, Connect Group's not having any further funding. So obviously we have our retained earnings. You know, we've got secure financial management systems in place and things like that. So this was just a section around that. We're nearly there, guys. Accountability. Remember that you've got a legal and an ethical accountability, and there's a whole section that will go on around that. Customers and clients. And this is what, for you, you know, if you want to, this is really good for your strategic planning. When you want to review how are you meeting the needs of your customers and clients? And just as a reminder that you're there for them and not for yourselves. So you can't say, I can't stand that person wants to come here and do an art class and just untidies everything. That's the space. So it's all about that, identifying the customer's needs. Have we met their needs? Evaluated at the end of the year. And looking at having a policy about what you define to be that line of good customer service. Do you feel everyone within your centers are working to the same ethical, good customer service level? Okay, so there's going to be a little bit about that there as well. And again, just to close off, when the kit is designed to be used, whenever it is needed, at a location and time suitable for you and your group and its needs, and it is really simple.